Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I teach in Toronto, Canada. And my guest today is Angela Bradshaw, who is a teacher in Woking, Surrey. Did I get that right, Angela?
You did, yes,
Woking,
you did.
Surrey, the United Kingdom. And we're going to talk today about Angela's experience working with doing distance learning. And she's going to have some suggestions for teachers who are thinking about doing it. Angela, welcome. Good to talk to you.
It's so nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me. And good to talk about this important subject.
It is right now. It is a crucial subject,
yeah.
I would say, and probably
yeah.
will be for a while. So you've been a teacher for what, 10 years, I think?
That's right. Yeah.
And I assume that when you first started teaching, you were doing in-person sessions.
Yeah,
primarily.
very much so. Yeah.
So when did you start exploring Zoom? Excuse me.
Zoom. That's okay. So I was invited or asked if I could teach a group of sonographers, medical ultrasound practitioners, which is my own background, in Nova Scotia. And we looked into the costs of flying there to do an in-person workshop, and it was just too much.
Yeah.
So we came to the idea that maybe we could do it online, do some webinars, and that's what we did, and it was really successful. So this was in 2016, and we did hour-long webinars each month for 4 months in a study afternoon that they had available. They, like me, when I was practicing as a sonographer, there's a lot of work-related musculoskeletal disorders and repetitive strain injuries, and so they were experiencing all of those and wanted to help themselves learn how to avoid injury and keep health and well-being up in clinical practice. So it was great to have this really successful 4-month, but 1 hour a month series of webinars. And I think a bit like Ariel was saying when you talked to her, it was great to use a presentation as part of the lesson to help keep. It was 15 in that group, and it helped keep attention and pace the the way the lesson went, and keep everyone's learning style accommodated. So there was some visual content, there was some experiential movement activities, and then I always included a semi-supine as part of the session, which was very welcome and really successful. And so I was so pleased with that group of 15 that I decided to offer some small webinars for individual sonographers from anywhere in the world, if they wanted to learn how to keep their health and well-being going. So I did a few small groups too, up to 5, when I was working on my own. I thought that was a nice number to keep, so that I could observe everyone well enough. But I guess that was at the beginning of my experiences, so you don't know how it's going to go and how people will receive the information, but I liked working with up to a group of 15. That was perhaps big enough in one sitting. I know perhaps Ariel would disagree because she's done hundreds.
She went to a couple of hundred, 200 plus. Yeah. So what I want to, you're also doing one-on-one online sessions, right? So we can get to that in a minute, but I'd like to ask you, just for people who might get a request like you did, or who are just interested in working with groups of students, what would be some general pieces of advice apart from learning how to use Zoom, I guess, and screen share functions, and I guess with a larger group, small group breakouts? But it sounds like your groups were not, the ones you're teaching now are not that big, but still, what sort of general advice would you give to someone who gets a request? Or And they've never taught online.
I've never done it before.
Ever. Yeah.
I'll explain what I did. So I got the request and then thought, help, I've never done this before. How will it work? And I've got to look competent before I even, agreed to doing it. So I had my husband in one room and me in another. Just thought, right, let's play. So got my account on Zoom and then just thought, okay, let's start a meeting and see what the sound is like, how, am I heard, what my background is like, the lighting, and how to share, so I didn't want to look like I was fumbling around with, the buttons, so to speak.
Right.
So, and it's very straightforward and simple. So I really simply and quickly realized this was going to be totally straightforward. So that,
and
that's
echoes,
how I did it.
That does echo a lot of other teachers' experiences with distance learning in general, that they're often shocked at how effective it is.
Yeah, really.
And I like what you said. You got your husband to help out. Now, someone else, maybe they would get a friend or maybe one of their students or someone, and just experiment. Do some experimental sessions that are not, no high stakes involved.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So background's good. I suppose you want to tell people about background lighting a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, and where they position themselves, because often people put themselves in front of the window so that they're in silhouette.
Not a
so
good
often.
idea.
So often. Even when you say have a window in front of you, often they have it behind them. Things
That's
like
probably
that.
the single most important bit of advice in terms of lighting. Have lots of light coming at you. Not from behind you. Is there anything else you want to say about group teaching before we get to in-person teaching?
Just don't be afraid. And if you have a group hosted by a single organizer, what I did with my Joanne Chapman in Nova Scotia was we had a little trial run as well ahead of the start date. I said, let's set up 10 minutes, make sure everything's working. You're actually in the conference room. Let's try it. And if there's any glitches, we find out before the group is wanting to start learning. So we did that. We found a few glitches and they were easily sorted out without the pressure of, we're eating into the learning time. So I would always recommend that. And it doesn't take very long. It's just well worth doing.
That's very good advice. And did she act as a bit of a moderator for the class?
She did, actually. That was quite nice to have her in charge of her team. I mean, it was her team. So it was quite nice to have two of us in charge, if you see what I mean. So she could handle the technical issues at their end, because obviously I'm not being present and, so far away, I couldn't do anything about any issues that would come up there. So it was really nice to have two in charge to collaborate and work well together and lead together. Right.
So now you're also teaching one-on-one sessions.
Yes.
And what's been your general experience with that as compared to private sessions, in-person private sessions?
It's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't planned or prepared for. The pandemic hit and the school that I work, or two schools I work at, just immediately closed, and one of them just went everything immediately online. And so I was so pleased to have had that previous experience, because I wasn't scared, and I just thought that's fine. It was a different platform. They use Microsoft Teams at Wellington College, but again, it was quite. I asked one of my colleagues, can I have a trial with you before I go to a lesson, because I've not used the platform. Again, it was really easy and very straightforward. And if you have any young people, young teenagers in your life, they're often really quick and savvy at how to use any of these platforms. So yeah, it was really great actually. And in fact, one of the music teachers said, if you have a problem, your student will be able to help you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we moved quickly onto teaching online, and it was I would say it was seamless because everyone knew each other, so we already had a relationship and we already had trust, and it was just almost a novelty to begin with, like, you know, ooh, let's use this platform and see how Alexander's technique translates online. And you know, it just is so perfect because it's almost in the same way that the man himself learned, isn't it, with observation and experiential work, and develops a much more independent way of learning much more quickly, I feel.
Yeah, that's something that I started noticing right away myself. I'm primarily doing one-on-one sessions, that it's just totally clear to both the student and the teacher that this is a learning process, and that as a student, you've got to take responsibility for experimenting, doing some work on your own. It's not, you're not going to just get it through a teacher's hand, so to speak.
Yeah.
What would you say? Because there are teachers out there who feel very deeply that without hands-on help, it's not really the Alexander technique, and or it's just not going to be as good. What would you say to them?
I know that people do have that view. I would say that, well, Alexander himself worked without hands for 20 years. So yeah, there is that. And that hands-on only came about through his frustration when he couldn't communicate what he was meaning, or the person couldn't receive it in the way he was meaning. And you know, I've done some, I'm in the middle of a second course with Penelope Easton. She's done some online training toolkit, a 10-week course, and I'm now doing her advanced course. That's really helped sort of enhance my ability to articulate the work from afar, if you like. I wouldn't share the opinion that it's not the Alexander technique. For me, it's even more authentic, and we just have to get better and more articulate in our communications to our students. It's definitely possible.
Just to be devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people who have that view that we were just talking about will say is, well, how can the student get the kinesthetic experience that you can give them with your hands? That's a question that comes up a lot. I have my answer to it, but I'd like to hear your answer to that.
So, well, when you're working online with a student, I always ask them, you know, what are you experiencing? So and it's not always easy to begin with, because students, especially teenagers, aren't used to being asked, what are your thoughts? And you know, you sort of have to develop trust that it's not a trick question. You know, I'm genuinely asking you what you're noticing, and can you describe to me what you're noticing? So once they get into this ability, and they become more skilled at being able to tell you what they're experiencing in terms of sensation, or you know, feelings of lightness or heaviness, or then you know, then I can really see progress in them. So it's a different way. Of course, it's not the same as hands-on. It's different, but it's for me, it's almost more effective.
Well, that's been my experience. In general, people who have online classes with me need fewer sessions to get to a given point. And in terms of that argument about kinesthetic experience, well, they can get it by, for example, if you teach them an Alexander direction and that changes the way they move, they're certainly going to get a kinesthetic experience from that. So
and I was going to ask you, Could I read something out? I've asked my students at Wellington College who they'd all had one-on-one hands-on lessons with me, and then we transitioned to online, and I thought I'm going to ask them what's your experience, how is it different?
Oh, excellent. Let's hear it.
Could I read a couple? So they're just very short. So one 14-year-old, he said, Alexander lessons have really helped me over this period, meaning the pandemic, especially having my lessons on screens most of the day. These lessons have made me feel really relaxed and comfortable. I also feel that I have to concentrate more on how I do each exercise as you are not physically there. So I just thought, great.
Someone
that was one.
Doing some thinking for themselves.
Yes, exactly. Another, so a 16-year-old female student, remote Alexander technique requires a lot more independence. I prefer hands-on, one-to-one, but it definitely works. It's still beneficial, but more challenging. So I just thought, okay, she enjoys the one-on-one, hands-on, but it's still beneficial. I just was so pleased with both of those. And I'll just read a final one, which is also quite short. I find AT online harder than hands-on AT, as you have to think about it more for yourself. However, I look forward to AT lessons, whether or not it is online, as it is a time to really relax into your own body. I feel Alexander technique offers you moments to pause and think about what is happening in each part of your body. And that's a 13-year-old who's only had, probably, at that point, he'd probably had about 11 half-hour lessons.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is fascinating to me that the power of this method of teaching.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been brought on our profession by an external event. But another thing that a lot of teachers have said, maybe you would agree with this, that even if teachers are using online, even if and when they go back to in-person teaching, their teaching is going to be different as a result of their online teaching. What do you think about that?
Do you mean, I'm not sure my connection was then fully there. Did you, were you asking how it's changing the teaching?
How they might change their in-person teaching later on.
I mean, I feel mine has changed completely because I used to be quite reliant on the hands-on feedback, and actually you don't need it. It doesn't need to be so dominant. And maybe for a teenager, that's quite reassuring not to be touched by, by a person. And just using all of your senses, observation and listening, and the whole body language. I think at first it was you want to put your hands through the screen and think, oh, let me just use my hands to convey what I mean. But when that's not possible, you get much more articulate and skilled at describing and using more observational powers to learn about your pupil and stay connected with them.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to say to a teacher that is contemplating this move to online teaching?
I would definitely recommend it because it's so accessible for the student as well as for ourselves. We can have, of course, a wider reach because we don't have to be in a particular location.
8 billion potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so I would really recommend it.
Well, I think this would be a good place to end our conversation. My guest has been Angela Bradshaw. She teaches in Woking, Surrey, and she teaches online. I'll put a link to her website by the interview, and if you want to book a lesson with her, send her an email, right?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Robert.
Well, thank you so much. This has been it's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you too. Thank you. Really great to see you.